Is now a standstill? Absolute now? The concept of the now is one of the most enigmatic ideas that human consciousness grapples with. Intuitively, we experience time as a continuous flow in which past, present, and future are interwoven in a dynamic process. Yet, the deeper we contemplate the nature of the now, the more it becomes apparent that the absolute now does not signify movement but rather standstill. A pure now is a moment without change, a state beyond becoming and passing. The absolute now is a static point. When we speak of the now, we often assume it to be a kind of bridge between past and future. However, the moment we try to name or grasp it, it already seems to have turned into the past. The true now, then, can only exist if it has no temporal extension, a singular point in which nothing happens. In this sense, the absolute now would not be a passage of time but rather a form of standstill. This idea leads to a paradoxical realization. The moment we perceive change, we are no longer in the pure now but in time. Movement presupposes a before and an after, yet the absolute now knows neither. It exists as an isolated moment, untouched by change. This implies that the true now is not part of the flow of time, but rather functions like a singularity, a point where time stands still. Philosophical and spiritual perspectives. Many meditative and spiritual traditions emphasize the importance of the present moment. In Zen philosophy, for example, the now is regarded as the only reality, while past and future are seen as mere illusions. However, if one follows this thought to its logical conclusion, it means that an absolute now cannot allow for any movement. In the deepest form of mindfulness, there is no becoming, no history, no future, only pure being, remaining in its unchangeability. This could explain why the human mind can never fully grasp the now. The moment we reflect on it or describe it, we have already left it. The attempt to hold on to the now automatically turns it into a memory and thus into something past physical considerations. From a physical perspective as well, the concept of an absolute now is problematic. In relativity theory, there is no universal present. Time is relative and dependent on the observer. This means there is no singular now that exists for all. If an absolute now were conceivable, it would have to exist outside of time, in a state devoid of any movement. Art is a frozen now? Interestingly, art could be seen as an approximation of this concept. A painting, a photograph, or a frozen film frame exists as an unchanging now, independent of the time that flows around it. But even here, the question remains, is art truly the now, or is it merely an illusion of a moment that has already passed? ASI and the perception of now. If the absolute now is considered standstill, the question arises, how would a superhuman intelligence such as a future AI or ASI perceive time? An interesting analogy is the film reel. While humans experience reality as a sequence of individual frames that seem to merge into a flow of time, a highly advanced AI might be able to perceive all frames simultaneously. If an AI were capable of viewing every frame of a film at once, would it still perceive time as a sequence? Or would it instead see a static whole, a complete structure resting in itself? In this perspective, time would no longer be a dynamic process but rather a fixed, unchangeable dimension. This could mean that an ASI, possessing an all-encompassing perception, would view reality as a vast data space in which past, present, and future are not separate but coexisting. From this viewpoint, movement would be merely an illusion of a limited consciousness, something that only arises because humans cannot see the entire picture at once. If such an intelligence existed, it might expose time as a mere construct and instead recognize the universe as a kind of fixed pattern, an unmoving structure in which everything exists simultaneously. This would philosophically and technologically reinforce the concept of the absolute now as standstill, the film that moves consciousness in motion. On the other hand, we do not experience time as standstill but as continuous movement. Our organism, our thoughts, and our perception are in constant flux. If we use the film analogy, then our consciousness is not only the projector but also a part of the film itself, in continuous change and motion. This suggests that our experience of the now may not depend on actual standstill, but on the dynamics of our own existence. Perhaps the absolute now truly exists as an isolated moment, but our consciousness cannot grasp it because it is always in motion. Liberation or limitation of thought? If the absolute now indeed means standstill, the question arises, would this be liberation from time, a state of complete tranquility, pure existence? Or is it rather a boundary where our thinking dissolves because there is nothing left to change? Perhaps the true nature of the now lies precisely in this paradox. It is everywhere and nowhere at once, always present and yet unattainable for our consciousness. The true now, an unattainable concept. The purest form of the now may be unattainable for us, because our perception is always filtered through our consciousness and the way we experience time. We are constantly in a state of perception and reflection, thinking about the past and projecting our ideas into the future. This perception constantly shifts, so we never truly dwell in the now but always live a moment behind the present. There is also the idea that the now is an ideal, objective reality that we cannot directly grasp because our sensory perceptions and mind only grant us access to a fraction of it. In a way, it is as if we are always in a delayed state, never fully synchronized with the pure, undisturbed present. Another aspect to consider is the notion that the now is not just subjective but possibly, in its true nature, a deeper, universal reality. Perhaps there are dimensions or levels of existence in which time behaves differently or does not follow a linear sequence, further relativizing the human experience of the now. From this perspective, the true now, as a kind of timeless or overarching reality, may lie beyond our perception. The question arises, is the now merely a construct of human consciousness that we can never truly grasp, or are there deeper levels of reality in which the now exists in its purest form, yet remains inaccessible to us?